The rain hammered against Marcus's windshield like 1,000 tiny fists. Each drop a reminder of how close he was to losing everything. In 3 days, he would stand before a judge who would decide if he was fit to raise his daughter alone. 3 days to prove that a man working 2 jobs, living paycheck to paycheck in a cramped apartment, could give 7-year-old Emma the life she deserved. 3 days before his ex-wife's lawyer would paint him as negligent, irresponsible, unworthy. The wipers scraped across the glass in a rhythm that matched his racing heartbeat. And Marcus gripped the steering wheel tighter, fighting back tears he couldn't afford to shed. Not now. Not when Emma was waiting for him at Mrs. Chen's apartment, probably already asleep. Her small hand clutching the stuffed rabbit he'd sewn back together 3 times. Because buying a new one wasn't in the budget. That's when he saw her. A figure stood on the side of Highway 9, barely visible through the sheets of rain. A woman in a business suit, soaked through, waving her arms frantically beside a car, with its hood propped open and steam billowing into the stormy night. Marcus's first instinct was to keep driving. He was already 20 minutes late picking up Emma, and Mrs. Chen charged $5 for every 15 minutes. After 7 o'clock, $5 he didn't have. $5 that would mean Emma eating mac and cheese for dinner 3 nights instead of 2. But his mother's voice echoed in his head. The same words she'd repeated throughout his childhood in their small house in Alabama: "Baby, we might not have much, but we always have enough to help someone who needs it more." Marcus pulled over. The woman stumbled toward his truck, her expensive heels sinking into the muddy shoulder. Up close, Marcus could see she was probably in her 50s. With silver-streaked hair plastered to her face and mascara running down her cheeks. She looked terrified. "Thank God," she gasped. "My phone died, and I've been out here for almost an hour. No one stopped." "Get in," Marcus said, pushing open the passenger door. "You'll catch pneumonia out there." She climbed in gratefully, shivering despite the heat blasting from the vents. "I'm Judge Catherine Morrison," she said, extending a trembling hand. "I was on my way back from a conference in Atlanta when my car just died." Marcus's blood turned to ice. Judge Morrison. The name had been burned into his brain for weeks. The judge assigned to his custody hearing. The woman who held Emma's future in her hands was sitting in his truck, dripping rainwater onto the seat he'd repaired with duct tape. His mind raced. Should he tell her who he was? Would it seem like he'd stopped on purpose, trying to manipulate her? But how could he not tell her? Wouldn't it be worse if she found out later? "I'm Marcus," he said carefully, leaving off his last name. "Where do you need to go?" "There's a gas station about 5 miles up," she said. If I could just use their phone to call a tow truck. Marcus glanced at the clock. 7:23, he was now costing himself $10 he didn't have. But the woman was shaking so hard her teeth were chattering. "Gas stations closed by now," Marcus said. "This whole stretch shuts down after 7. But there's a mechanic about 15 miles north, Hank's place. He lives above the shop. Might be able to help." Judge Morrison's face crumpled. "I'm supposed to be home. My daughter's flying in from Boston tonight. And I promised I'd pick her up from the airport at 9. I haven't seen her in 4 months." Something in her voice, the raw desperation of a parent afraid of disappointing their child, made Marcus's decision. "I'll take you to Hank's," he said. "We'll get you sorted out." As he pulled back onto the highway, Judge Morrison wrapped her arms around herself. "I can't believe you stopped," she said quietly. "Everyone else just kept driving." "Can't leave someone stranded," Marcus replied. "Especially not in weather like this." They drove in silence for a few minutes before she spoke again. "You have kids?" Marcus's hands tightened on the wheel. "A daughter. Emma. She's 7. They're everything, aren't they?" Judge Morrison said, staring out the window. "I became a judge because I wanted to make the world safer for my daughter. But sometimes I wonder if I've spent so much time trying to protect other People's children that I've missed too. Much of her life. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't the cold, distant figure he'd imagined from his lawyer's descriptions. This was a mother, just as scared and uncertain as he was. I'm sure she knows you love her, Marcus said softly. Judge Morrison laughed, but it was tinged with sadness. I hope so. Her father and I divorced when she was 10. The custody battle was brutal. I fought so hard to keep her. Worked myself to the bone to prove I could provide for her alone. And I won. But sometimes I wonder what it cost both of us. Marcus's throat tightened. Did you ever regret fighting for her? Not for a single second, Judge Morrison said fiercely. She needed her mother. I wasn't perfect, God knows. I made mistakes, but I loved her with everything I had. That's what mattered most. When they reached Hank's shop, the mechanic took one look at Judge Morrison's car details and shook his head. Can't get parts until tomorrow at the earliest, maybe Wednesday. Best I can do tonight is give you a ride to the nearest hotel. About 30 miles west. Judge Morrison's face went pale. I can't. I need to get to the airport. Marcus checked his phone. 7:47, he was now 47 minutes late for Emma. Which meant Mrs. Chin would charge him $20. $20 that was supposed to buy Emma new sneakers because her toes were pushing through her current pair. But he looked at Judge Morrison's desperate face and heard himself say, "The airport's on my way. I can take you." I couldn't possibly ask. You're not asking. I'm offering. The drive to the airport took another hour. Judge Morrison talked about her daughter. About missing her college graduation because of a trial. About trying to balance being a good judge with being a good mother. Marcus mostly listened. Occasionally sharing stories about Emma, her love of butterflies. The way she sang made-up songs in the bathtub. Her laugh that sounded like music. You sound like a wonderful father, Judge Morrison said as they pulled up to the terminal. Marcus's hands trembled slightly on the wheel. I try to be. It's not always easy, doing it alone. It never is, she agreed. She reached for the door handle, then paused. I don't know how to thank you. You've gone so far out of your way for a complete stranger. No thanks needed, Marcus said. Just hug your daughter tight when you see her. I will. She smiled. You know, in my line of work, I see a lot of people at their worst. It's easy to become cynical. But tonight, you reminded me that there's still real goodness in the world. That there are still people who help others without expecting anything in return. That kindness isn't extinct. After she disappeared into the terminal, Marcus drove to Mrs. Chen's apartment. The late fee cost him $25 total. Money he'd been saving for Emma's birthday next month. Emma was curled up asleep on Mrs. Chen's couch, her rabbit tucked under her chin. Long night? Mrs. Chen asked sympathetically. Yeah, Marcus said, scooping Emma into his arms. But not a bad one. 3 days later, Marcus sat in Judge Morrison's courtroom. His lawyer beside him and his ex-wife's legal team across the aisle. His heart hammered as the judge entered. And her eyes widened almost imperceptibly when she saw him. The custody hearing proceeded with brutal efficiency. His ex-wife's lawyer painted him as financially unstable, citing his modest income and cramped living situation. They questioned his work schedule, his lack of family support. Even the duct-taped seat in his truck that someone had apparently photographed in the courthouse parking lot. Marcus's lawyer fought back, presenting evidence of Emma's happiness, her good grades, the love that filled their small apartment even when money was tight. Finally, Judge Morrison spoke. I've reviewed all the materials in this case. And I've listened carefully to both sides. This is never an easy decision. She paused, looking directly at Marcus. But I've learned that what matters most in a parent isn't the size of their bank account or the square footage of their home. What matters is their character, their capacity for sacrifice, their willingness to put their child's needs above their own, even when it costs them dearly. She glanced at Emma, who sat in the hallway visible through the courtroom's glass window, coloring with a social worker. Mr. Bennett, 3 nights ago, you went significantly out of your way to help someone in need. Despite it costing you time and money you clearly couldn't spare. You didn't know who I was. You gained nothing from your kindness except the knowledge that you'd done the right thing. That tells me more about your fitness as a parent than any financial statement ever could. Marcus could barely breathe. It's the opinion of this court that Emma Bennett's best interests are served by remaining in her father's primary custody. Joint custody arrangement will continue as previously established, with modifications to the visitation schedule as outlined in the recommended parenting plan. The gavel came down, and Marcus's world shifted back into focus. Emma would stay with him. His little girl, his everything, would come home. As people filed out of the courtroom, Judge Morrison called him back. Mr. Bennett, I want you to understand something. My decision was based entirely on the evidence and what I believe is best for Emma. But I'd be lying if I said our encounter didn't affect me. You reminded me that good parenting isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in moments, in choices, in the values we model for our children every single day. Thank you, Your Honor, Marcus whispered, tears streaming down his face. No, she said softly. Thank you. For stopping when everyone else drove past. For reminding me why I do this job. And for being exactly the kind of father Emma needs. That night, Marcus and Emma celebrated with ice cream, budget-friendly. Vanilla from the grocery store. But sweeter than anything money could buy. As Emma chattered about her day, Marcus thought about how close he'd come to driving past Judge Morrison in the rain. About the twist of fate that had put him in a position to help the one person who could take everything from him. But he'd stopped. Not because he knew who she was, but because it was right. Because his mother had taught him that kindness isn't something you calculate. It's something you give freely, expecting nothing in return. And sometimes, in the most unexpected ways, that kindness comes back to you 100-fold.